The first time I realized my aunt was going to try and bury me in court, she was holding a coffee cup at my father's funeral and laughing at something my cousin said. Not laughing loud, just that small, polite laugh women like her have perfected. The kind that says, "I'm grieving, but I'm above this." Her free hand was resting on my arm, and her thumb was rubbing slow circles into my sleeve, like I was a horse she was trying to settle. I remember thinking, she doesn't even know she's doing it. That's how natural performing has become for her. My name is Hollis Wren. I'm 31 years old. I work as a forensic accountant for a regional firm in Tulsa, and 3 months before that funeral, my father had asked me to come over for Sunday dinner because, in his words, something feels off and I need a second pair of eyes. He was 68. He'd just retired from running the family's commercial real estate company, a business his father had started in 1961 with a single strip mall and a handshake loan. He'd handed the day-to-day operations over to my Aunt Marlene, his younger sister, about a year before. She'd worked there for 2 decades. She'd been waiting, quietly, for her turn. Everyone in the family said it was the natural progression. My father had no son, just me. And according to the unspoken rules of our family, daughters in finance got Christmas cards and daughters who ran companies got headaches. I never argued. I had my own career. I liked numbers other people had touched. I liked finding the lie inside the spreadsheet. That was the work I wanted, not running a company my grandfather built before I was born. But that Sunday dinner, my father slid a manila folder across the kitchen table with my name on it in his careful, square handwriting. He said, "Your aunt has been signing off on consulting agreements I've never heard of." He said, 3 of them so far this quarter. He said, "I might be paranoid, but I taught you how to read these things and I want you to read them." I read them that night in his guest bedroom, sitting on the edge of a quilt my grandmother had made in 1978. There were 3 contracts. Each one was for a marketing or strategic consulting firm. Each one had been paid out in monthly installments of between $12,000 and $22,000. Each one was signed by my aunt as acting CEO, with a countersignature that was supposed to be my father's, and which absolutely was not my father's. I knew his signature. I'd watched him sign things my whole life. He had a small upward flick at the end of his last name that he could not undo if he tried, and the signatures on those contracts were too smooth, too proud of themselves. I told him in the morning. I told him over coffee while he was buttering toast, and I watched the toast knife go very still in his hand. He didn't get angry. That was the thing about my father. He got quiet. He said, "Okay, kiddo, let's not say anything yet. Let's see how far the rabbit hole goes." We agreed. I would dig, quietly, through legitimate means. I had access through him as a consulting analyst, an arrangement we documented with the company attorney that same week so that everything I did would be above board if it ever needed to be. I want you to remember that part. I did this clean. From day one. Because I am, more than anything else my father raised me to be, a person who does not give the other side an opening. He had a heart attack 4 weeks later. He was alone at the office on a Saturday morning. My aunt found him. That's what she said. That's what the medics wrote down. By the time I got to the hospital, he was already gone, and she was already crying in a way I had never once in 31 years seen her cry. And a part of my brain that I am still ashamed of looked at her face and thought, "You've practiced this." I want to tell you I was wrong. I want to tell you I was a grieving daughter projecting on a grieving sister. But every single thing that happened in the next 8 months proved that part of my brain was the only honest thing in the room. The will was read in the office of a man named Mr. Hadley, who had been my father's attorney for 30 years and had a face like a tired bloodhound. The contents weren't surprising. The house went to me. The investment portfolio, fully liquid, just under $900,000, went into a trust for me with Mr. Hadley as the trustee. And the company, the real estate company, went to me as well, with my aunt named as interim chief executive until I either took over or sold it. My aunt sat across the conference table in a black knit dress and didn't react. Not when the trust was named. Not when the house was named. Not when the company was named. Her hands stayed folded. Her face stayed sad in the polite, low-watt way she'd practiced at the funeral. Only her eyes moved, just slightly, when Mr. Hadley said the word interim. I caught it. Just for a second. Like a fish under ice. 2 weeks later, she sent me a card. A real card, mailed, with a stamp. The card said she was so glad we still had each other. The card said she knew her brother would have wanted us to be a team. The card said she'd been thinking about all the ways the company could honor his legacy. She signed it Aunt Marlene, with a little drawing of a heart next to her name, and I understood, reading it, that this was a woman who was preparing to take everything I had inherited and was building a paper trail of affection she could submit later. I didn't write back. I started looking instead. The thing about being a forensic accountant is that you don't go looking for fraud. You go looking for patterns, and fraud is just the pattern that doesn't fit. You learn to ignore the things people are loud about. You learn to watch the things they don't bother to hide because they think nobody's looking. She wasn't bothering to hide much. In the 4 weeks after my father died, she signed off on 2 new consulting contracts. One was with a company called Northbridge Strategic Partners that had been incorporated in Delaware 6 months earlier and had a registered agent address that, when I ran it, also served as the registered agent for a company called Crown Meridian Holdings, which had been incorporated 4 months earlier, which had a single director listed publicly, which was a man named Curtis Pell, who I had never heard of in my life. I started a spreadsheet. I called it nothing. Just a string of letters and numbers. I kept it on a personal laptop that had never been on the company network. I wrote down every dollar amount, every transfer date, every routing number, every shell. By month 3, I had identified 4 shells. By month 5, I had identified 4 shells. The total moving through them since the day my father had slid that manila folder across the table was $4,420,000. $4 million taken from a company my grandfather built with his own 2 hands in less than a year. I did not say anything. This is the part I want you to understand, because it's the part the comments section is going to ask me about, and I want to give you a real answer instead of a clean one. People asked me later, why didn't you stop her sooner? Why did you let her keep stealing? And the honest answer is that I needed her to keep stealing. I needed every single transaction. I needed pattern. I needed the kind of evidence that does not let a defense attorney say it was an isolated incident or a misunderstanding or grief-driven mismanagement. I needed her so deep in the hole that no one with a law degree could pull her out. So I let her dig. And while she dug, she went to work on me. The first time I knew she was building a case against my mind, it was a phone call from my cousin's wife, Tessa, who I had always liked. She called me on a Tuesday night and asked very gently if I was okay. She said, "Your aunt mentioned you've been having a hard time." She said you've been talking to your dad. Like out loud. Like at the cemetery. I had been to the cemetery once since the funeral. I had stood there for maybe 10 minutes. I had not spoken out loud. My aunt had not been there. I said, "That's not true, Tessa." I said it calmly because my father trained me to be calm. I said, "Who else has she said this to?" Tessa got quiet, and then she said, "I think she said it to a lot of people." I thanked her. I told her I appreciated her calling. I hung up. I sat on my kitchen floor for a long time with my back against the dishwasher. Then I opened my laptop. I started a second file. This one I called M1, just for myself. M for Marlene. In it, I started logging every secondhand piece of information I could verify about what she was telling people. I logged Tessa's call with the date and the substance. I logged a text from a family friend who asked if I had thought about, quote, taking a break from work to focus on my health. I logged a conversation with my father's old golf partner who told me, with real tenderness, that he hoped I had someone to talk to about what I'd been through, because grief did funny things to people, and I shouldn't be afraid to seek help. He told me my aunt had cried on the phone with him. He told me she said she was so worried about me she wasn't sleeping. I started to notice the way she set up these conversations. She never said anything outright. She said, "I just want to make sure she's okay." She said, "Between us, I'm scared for her." She said, "I don't know if I should say this, but..." The trick was that she wasn't accusing me of anything. She was confiding in people. And confidences travel further than accusations because the people who hear them feel chosen. That was when I called Mr. Hadley. I did not tell him about the spreadsheet. Not yet. I told him I was concerned that my aunt was pursuing some kind of conservatorship or competency action, and I wanted to know what would happen if she did. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Hollis, has she contacted you about getting evaluated by anyone?" I said no. He said, "Has anyone in the family suggested you see a doctor?" I said yes. He said, "I want you to come into my office tomorrow. I want you to bring everything you have." So I brought everything. I did not bring the spreadsheet. I want to be honest about that. I brought the M1 file. I brought the dates. I brought the names of people she had spoken to. I brought the 2 contracts my father had given me before he died, which were the only ones I had been authorized to look at as a consultant. I held the rest of it back because I had a plan, and I needed the plan to stay mine until the right moment. Mr. Mentrant. Hadley listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, he took off his reading glasses and folded them on the desk and said, "You've done a smart thing, telling me this now." And he said, "I'm going to give you some advice, and I want you to take it." He told me 3 things. He told me to get my own evaluation voluntarily from a psychologist of my choosing, with a complete written report I would keep in a safe deposit box. He told me to stop attending family events for a while because every conversation she could engineer at one was ammunition. And he told me to be ready for her to file something formal because women who plant seeds with this many people are usually planting them for harvest. I did all 3. The psychologist's name was Dr. Marisol Quintero. She was 62. She had 3 diplomas on the wall, and she ran me through a 6-hour battery of evaluations across 2 days. Cognitive assessment, MMPI-2, structured clinical interview, the works. Her written report ran 19 pages. The conclusion, in the kind of plain English you only get from someone with nothing to prove, was that I was a high-functioning adult woman of above-average intellectual capacity, with no detectable mood disorder, no thought disorder, no signs of cognitive decline, and grief responses well within normal range for someone who had lost a parent 5 months earlier. I put that report in a safe deposit box at a bank my aunt did not know I used. 8 weeks later, my aunt's attorney filed the petition. The petition was for a temporary conservatorship of my person and estate on the grounds that I was suffering from acute, grief-related psychological deterioration, that I had been observed engaging in erratic behavior, including talking to my deceased father at his gravesite, that I had refused offers of help from family members, and that I was, in my current state, incapable of managing the assets I had inherited, including my interest in the real estate company. Attached to the petition was a letter on letterhead from a man named Dr. Billy Royston Thorne, MD, a psychiatrist, who stated in clinical language that, based on his evaluation of me, I was exhibiting signs consistent with a major depressive episode with psychotic features and required immediate intervention. I had never met Dr. Royston Thorne. I had never been to his office. I had never spoken to him on a telephone. I had never received an email from him, a letter from him, or a text message from him. The first time I ever saw his name was on that letter. I read the petition in Mr. Hadley's office. I read Dr. Thorne's letter twice. Then I started laughing. Mr. Hadley said, "Hollis." I said, "I'm sorry." He said, "Are you all right?" I said, "She didn't even pretend. She didn't even send me to a real one." He said, "That's not as funny as you think it is." I said, "Mr. Hadley, with respect, it's exactly as funny as I think it is, because she just gave us the whole case." Then I told him about the spreadsheet. I want to describe his face. He had been my father's attorney for 30 years. He was a careful man. He had spent half an hour earlier in the meeting walking me through, very gently, the procedural realities of contesting a conservatorship petition, the optics of family disputes in probate court, the way judges sometimes split babies. He had been preparing me, I think, for a long fight. When I told him there were 6 shell companies, when I told him there were 41 transactions, when I told him I had bank statements, signature comparisons, incorporation paperwork, registered agent overlaps, and that I had cross-referenced every single piece of it back to my aunt's personal banking activity through completely legitimate company-side records. His face did something I had never seen it do before. It got young. He smiled. It was a small smile, but it was there, and it was the smile of a man who had been doing this for 40 years and was, finally, about to enjoy his job again. He said, "Hollis, honey, why didn't you tell me first?" I said, "Because I needed her to file." He said, "You needed her to file." I said, "I needed her on the record, under oath, saying I'm too sick to manage the company. Because if she's right, she's the only one who could have moved this money. And if I'm right, she just told a court I was too sick to notice." He sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. He said, "Your father raised you, mean?" I said, "Yes, sir, he did." The hearing was set for a Wednesday in March. It was not a full conservatorship trial. It was a preliminary hearing on the petition for a temporary order, which her side wanted urgently because, and I quote from her attorney's own filing, "the estate's significant business interests required immediate stable oversight." I sat at the table with Mr. Hadley. I wore a navy blue blazer and a cream blouse and a thin gold chain my mother had given me when I was 18. I did my own hair. I did not cry. I had decided, weeks earlier, that I was not going to cry in that courtroom, no matter what was said about me, because tears were going to be presented as instability and dry eyes were going to be presented as coldness, and I was tired of trying to choose between the two. I just sat there. My aunt sat across the aisle in a black blouse with a small silver pendant, dabbing at her eyes with a folded tissue she kept tucked into her sleeve. Her attorney was a man named Bram Caulfield, a thin gentleman with very white teeth, who had a reputation in the local bar for being aggressive in a way that made other lawyers tired. The judge was a woman named Honorable Patrice Donleby. She was in her 60s. She wore reading glasses on a beaded chain. She had been on the bench for over 20 years. I had never met her. I knew nothing about her. I learned later that she had presided over more probate disputes than almost any judge in the state. I learned later that she had a reputation for being patient with grieving family members and short with attorneys who tried to play her. Mr. Caulfield went first. He stood up and gave a presentation about my aunt that I had to admit was beautiful work. He talked about her decades at the company. He talked about her devotion to her brother. He talked about how she had stepped into a leadership role no one had wanted to give her in the worst week of her life because the company her father had built required steady hands. He talked about how she was now, in addition to grieving her brother, watching her beloved niece, the daughter she'd raised as her own since the death of my mother, decline before her eyes. I had not been raised by my aunt. My mother had died when I was 22. I had been an adult in graduate school 2 states away. My aunt had sent flowers. Mr. Caulfield called my aunt to the stand. She testified, through gentle, quavering breaths, that I had been increasingly withdrawn since my father's death. That I had not been answering family calls. That I had been seen by multiple people, talking to myself. That I had refused offers of help. That on more than one occasion, I had spoken about my father in the present tense, as if I believed he was still alive. She said this last part looking directly at me. Her tissue was pressed to the corner of her eye. Her voice cracked just slightly on the word alive. She is, in her own way, a hell of an actress. I want to give her that. Then Mr. Caulfield introduced Dr. Thorne's letter. The judge accepted it into evidence. Mr. Caulfield rested. Hadley stood up. He said, "Your Honor, before I cross-examine the petitioner, the respondent would like to call Dr. Runts, Marisol Quintero, who was present in the courtroom and who conducted a full psychological evaluation of my client 3 months ago, the results of which were entered into the record this morning." Mr. Caulfield objected. He said the evaluation was self-selected and self-funded and therefore unreliable. The judge looked at him over her reading glasses and said, "Mr. Caulfield, I'd like to hear from her," and overruled him. Dr. Quintero took the stand. She walked through her credentials. She walked through her testing protocols. She walked through her conclusions, which were, plainly, that I was psychologically intact and exhibiting normal grief. Then Mr. Hadley said, "Dr. Quintero, in your professional opinion, is it possible to make a diagnosis of major depressive episode with psychotic features without actually meeting the patient?" Dr. Quintero said, "No, it would be a violation of professional ethics. It would be malpractice." Mr. Hadley said, "No further questions." Mr. Caulfield was a smart man, and I watched him understand in real time what was about to happen. His pen had stopped moving on his legal pad. He was looking at the page like it had said something to him. Mr. Hadley said, "The respondent calls Marlene Wren." My aunt got back on the stand. She looked, for the first time, slightly less sure of herself. Mr. Hadley walked her gently through her testimony again. He was kind to her. He let her repeat all of her concerns. He let her describe how worried she'd been. He let her say, again, that she just wanted what was best for me. Then he said, "Mrs. Wren, when did Dr. Royston Thorne meet with my client?" My aunt blinked. She said, "You'd have to ask Dr. Thorne." Mr. Hadley said, "I'm asking you. The petition you signed under oath states that Dr. Thorne examined the respondent. When did that examination occur?" My aunt looked at Mr. Caulfield. Mr. Caulfield did not look back. She said, "I believe it was last month." Mr. Hadley said, "You believe." She said, "Yes." Mr. Hadley said, "Where did the examination take place?" She said, "At his office." Mr. Hadley said, "What is the address of his office?" She said, "I don't recall offhand." Mr. Hadley said, "Mrs. Wren, are you aware that my client has never been to Dr. Thorne's office?" Silence. He said, "Are you aware that my client has never spoken to Dr. Thorne, has never met Dr. Thorne, has never received any communication of any kind from Dr. Thorne, and that I have a sworn affidavit from my client to that effect, dated yesterday and notarized?" She said, she might not remember. She said it small. She said it to the floor. Mr. Hadley said no further questions, but he wasn't done. He was just resetting. Then he asked the judge for permission to enter into evidence a series of documents related to certain financial transactions at the company. Mr. Caulfield objected on the grounds of relevance. Hadley said, "Your Honor, the petitioner has put my client's competency at issue specifically with regard to her ability to manage business assets. We believe these documents speak directly to that question." Judge Donleby took her glasses off. She rubbed the bridge of her nose. She put her glasses back on. She said, "I'll allow it," briefly. Mr. Hadley submitted the documents. There were a lot of them. He had a binder. The bailiff carried it to the bench. The judge began to read. I want you to picture the courtroom for a moment. The judge, reading, my aunt, and the witness box, watching the judge read. Mr. Caulfield, watching my aunt. Me, watching my hands. Because I had promised myself I would not look at her, and I kept the promise. It took the judge maybe 4 minutes to get to the page that mattered. I knew which page it was, because I had organized the binder myself the night before. The page was a side-by-side comparison of one of the consulting contract signatures and a verified specimen of my father's signature from a notarized document filed with the state. The verified one had the upward flick. The contract one did not. The judge looked up from the binder. She took her reading glasses off. She set them on the bench. She looked at my aunt. Her face was not angry. It was something worse than angry. It was something quiet. She said, "Mrs. Wren, did you sign your brother's name on these contracts?" My aunt opened her mouth. The judge said, "Before you answer, I want to remind you that you are still under oath. And I want to remind you that I have spent 22 years on this bench. And I want to remind you that you really thought no one was going to check." I will remember the way she said that line until the day I die. Not loud, not theatrical, just the small, finished sentence of a woman who had figured the whole thing out and was no longer interested in pretending she hadn't. My aunt's lawyer made a noise. I think it was the start of an objection. I think he forgot what he was objecting to. The noise just sort of came out and then stopped. My aunt did not answer the question. Judge Donleby said, "I am going to take a recess. When we return, I will be issuing a referral to the district attorney's office, and I will be denying the petitioner's request for a temporary conservatorship with prejudice, and I will be entertaining a motion from Respondent's Counsel for emergency injunctive relief regarding the assets of the company. We will reconvene in 20 minutes. She stood. The bailiff said, "All rise." We rose. My aunt did not look at me as she left the witness box. She walked past her attorney without speaking to him. He sat at the table and stared at his binder. In the hallway, Mr. Hadley put his hand on my shoulder and said, "You did good, kiddo." He said it the way my father used to say it. I think he knew he was doing it. I think it was on purpose. The rest of it, I'll tell you faster. Because the courtroom was the part that mattered. The DA's office moved on the case within 6 weeks. My aunt was charged with 21 counts including embezzlement, fraud, forgery, and perjury. She pled out eventually to avoid trial. The plea included full restitution, which was secured by a forced sale of her home and the liquidation of her personal investment accounts. She did 14 months in a state facility. She is, as of this writing, on supervised release. Dr. Royston Thorne was investigated by the State Medical Board following a complaint filed by Mr. Hadley on my behalf, supported by a sworn affidavit from me, and corroborating evidence including my full prior evaluation by Dr. Quintero. His license was suspended pending review. During the review, it came out that he had signed similar letters for at least 3 other family disputes in exchange for what the board described in extraordinarily polite language as consulting fees. His license was permanently revoked. He was charged with perjury and practicing outside the standard of care. He took a plea as well. The $4,420,000 was recovered mostly. About $3.8 million of it was restored through restitution, asset sale, and the unwinding of the shell entities. The rest is, as my financial advisor likes to say, a teaching expense. I run the company now. I didn't expect to. I expected to sell it. But after the trial, after I sat in my father's old office for the first time and looked at the framed photograph he kept on his desk of my grandfather standing in front of that 1961 strip mall, I called Mr. Hadley and told him I changed my mind. I told him I wanted to learn the business. I told him I was going to keep my forensic accounting practice on the side because I liked the work, but that the company was going to stay in the family. He said, "Your father would be proud of you." I said, "I know. I want to leave you with one thing, because I know how stories like this can sound, and I know there are people in the comments who will say it was too clean, or that real life doesn't go this smoothly, or that no woman is that calm in a courtroom. I want to be honest with you about what calm cost. I lost weight that year I should not have lost. I lost sleep. I have not gotten back. I went 6 months without speaking to half of my extended family because I could not figure out which of them she had gotten to. I had a panic attack in the parking lot of a Whole Foods because a woman in line in front of me was wearing the same perfume my aunt wore. The calm in that courtroom was not the absence of pain. The calm was a thing I built, on purpose, every morning for almost a year, by going to a desk and looking at numbers that I knew were true. My father taught me that. He taught me that when people are lying about you, the only way to win is to be more correct than they are loud. He taught me that grief makes you sloppy, and so you let other people be sloppy, and you don't be sloppy yourself. He taught me to wait. She didn't think I would wait. That was her last mistake. I think about that year a lot now. Not the courtroom part, the before part. The Sunday my father slid that manila folder across the kitchen table, and the morning after when he watched me explain what I'd found and didn't say a single thing for almost a full minute. I think about how he could have called the police that day. He could have confronted Marlene in his office on Monday morning. He could have done what most people would have done, which is move first and move loud. He didn't. He told me to wait. He told me to be careful. He told me to be more correct than they were loud. And 4 weeks later, he was gone. And I had to decide if his advice had been wisdom or just the habits of a careful man who didn't get to finish. I decided it was wisdom. I'm still deciding it. I think you have to decide it every morning. What I learned, and what I want to leave with you, is this. There is a kind of dignity in patience that nobody talks about, because patience doesn't make for good television. Marlene moved fast because she thought speed was strength. She filed petitions. She spread rumors. She bought a doctor's signature. She did, in less than a year, more damage than most people do in a lifetime, and she did it because she believed grief had made me sloppy and that being loud was the same thing as being right. She was wrong about both, and the reason she was wrong is the only reason I'm telling you this story. Character compounds. Every time I sat at my desk that year and chose to log one more transaction instead of confronting her, that was character compounding. Every time I called Mr. Hadley before I called my own anger, that was character compounding. Every time I let her think I was breaking when I wasn't, that was character compounding. None of it felt heroic. Most of it felt humiliating. But the work I did in private became the case I made in public, and the woman I built in those long months became the woman who could sit in a courtroom and not cry while her aunt called her insane. If somebody is lying about you right now, I want you to hear me. Don't argue with the lie. Build the truth somewhere quiet, where they can't see you doing it, and bring it out only when you have all of it. People who lie about other people are almost always sloppy about themselves. Let them be. Don't interrupt them. And the harder thing, be honest with yourself about what calm costs. I lost weight. I lost sleep. I had a panic attack in a parking lot over a perfume. I am not telling you to be cold. I am telling you that strength is not the absence of pain. It is the decision made every morning to keep doing the careful thing while the pain does whatever the pain is going to do. My father taught me that. Marlene taught me what happens to people who skip it. I know which one I'd rather be.